Hey, welcome back to another iOS development tutorial. I'm Benny Johnson, and in this episode I'm actually going to show you how to write the instructions for the methods we declared in the header file, which was iBankSir. Now, let's go ahead. We had 4 methods that we actually declared in our header file of iBankSir. So we're actually going to show you write the instructions for those methods in this tutorial. So let's get to it. Alright, so our first method that we're going to write is the interest for loan, right? So you can always copy and paste the header file, right? Or you can type it out. I'm going to type it out just so you can see what I'm doing. So it returns an int, and it's called interest rate for loan, and then we want to declare the scope with the curly braces, and that's where we put our code. Now this method is actually going to take a string, which will be a number, and it will be the amount that someone will want to loan. So they'll enter a string in there, like a number, like 1,000, and this method's going to be called, it's going to take that string and we're going to convert it to an int. Now we can do this through a special method for string and a strings, and we just use our referrer to this and a string, amount string. Remember, we declare methods inside those square brackets, amount string. Then we want to call the method of that amount string object, which is int value, right? So, and the bracket semicolon. So we're declaring an int called amount. It's going to take the string, whatever string's passed in here, and it's going to call the method int value, which will return an integer value from that string. Next, we want to test some conditions, and the easiest way to test conditions is to use the if statement. The if statement says, whatever conditions in here, if it's true, execute this scope here, this code in here, and we'll see a little bit more once I complete the code. So we're going to say if amount, so we're referring to that amount value, and if it is less than 5,000, right, we want to return 25, right? So this, if the value the user enter is less than 5,000, the interest rate for that value is going to be 25, because we're a mean bank, right? We have very extremely high interest rates when someone wants to borrow money from us, so we make the maximum profit possible. So then we want to test some other conditions, because what if it's greater than 5,000? So we can do that. So we just write another if statement. Again, it's going to be amount. If amount is less than 10,000, right, we want to return 15, which will represent 15%, end it with a semicolon, and we'll do another statement. If amount is greater than, less than 50,000, and you can change any of these values you want. You can change the interest rate, you can change how these values are represented. Just remember, you have to have the value that you're referring to and another value, and then that less than or greater than sign. So here I'm saying if amount is less than 50,000, then I want to return 10%, right? Because we're going to vary our interest rate by how much the person is actually wanting to loan. So if they want to loan $100, it wouldn't make sense to have 8%, because that would only mean we get $8. So, and if it's a bigger value like 100,000, 25% of that is like massive. It's just $25,000. So that's why we're going from the lower the value, the higher the interest rate, and that's what I'm doing here. Now, these if statements are pretty good. They cover most bases. But what if someone wanted to borrow $1 million, or maybe $10 million, or maybe $1 billion, right? We could write those variables in each time. We could write some other if statements, or we could use this special statement that goes along with every other if statement called else. Now, else means if these are not true, then execute this statement and we'll return 8. And remember that our method here actually returns an integer. That's the return. So I'll go ahead, it will make the amount integer equal to the string int value. Then if that amount is less than 5,000, it's going to return 25, and it's going to jump out of this code here. It's not going to execute all of this because it doesn't need to. We're returning 25, and it'll give that 25 back to whoever's calling it, right? So that's how that's worked. We're just returning the interest rate for the value the user is passing into that text box, and we'll execute that call when this submit button is pressed. Alright, so that's one method over. Now let's do the next one. Again, this returns an int. It's a period in months, and what this will return is how much time they actually have to pay it off by. So if it's like $100, we're not gonna say, oh, you can have 3 years to pay it off, right? We're gonna say you have 3 months, or if it's $1,000, you have 6 months, and if it's $10,000, you have like a year. So we're going to do exactly the same thing, except we're going to change the values and what they represent. So again, we're going to make an integer called amount, and remember, whatever variables we declare inside this scope lasts inside the scope. So once it has finished executing, this dies basically. This does not exist after it's been executed because we don't need it anymore. So I'm going to declare another amount integer, and again I'm going to put it near period string, and I'm going to call the int value. Right? Alright, so then next we want to put if amount is less than 5,000, right? We're going to do the same thing. We're going to return 3 months. So they have 3 months to pay it by. And again, another if statement. Amount is less than 10,000. Then we want to execute whatever code's in here, and we want to return 12 months, right? And we can also do something tricky. I'll show you this here. We don't always have to put those scope there, the little curly braces, and again it's going to be 15,000. We're going to return 24 months, so that will represent 2 years. Okay, and then we have our ending else statement. So else, right? And then I'm not going to put those curly braces in. What I'm going to do is something tricky, and I'm going to go return 36, which will be 3 years. Now you may be asking, well, we have curly braces for the other ones. The curly braces declare the scope of that statement. Like, the scope of this if statement is anywhere in between there and there, right? It's from the start of this curly brace to the end there. That's the scope. But we don't need curly braces if it's just going to be the line after it. So we can type all our statements in that line and we wouldn't need a curly brace. So that's why we're not using a curly brace. But if you do have a multi-line statement, maybe you have lots of code inside, you'll need those curly braces. So there's our two methods that we're gonna put in our bank cert. We still have two more to go, so let's get to it. So again, this is going to be an int return, and it's going to be called investment amount, curly braces to declare the scope of the statement, and I didn't need that many enters. This is basically return, so it's going to return this value. It's going to return invest amount, which is the amount the user is going to pass into that text box, right? But this time we're not converting a string to an integer, we're just taking an integer. So we're going to have to do that on the controller side when we actually send a message to this method, right? We're going to have to convert the string to an integer instead of letting bankser do it for us like we have in these two statements here. So we're going to return investment amount times 6 divided by 100 times period. Now generally a bank will have a saving interest, right? And it's normally 6%, 5%, 4%. It really depends on the bank. But we've said that we want 6% out of 100. That's why it's divided by 100, because that represents 6 out of 100, right? Then times the period divided by 12. Okay? Now you may be asking, well, why do you need that? Because interest, simple interest, works in years. It doesn't work in months. So in order to use months, we have to convert it and divide it by 12 so we can get, like, you know, each individual months, like 1 out of 12 and so on and so forth. Because otherwise it will use the years instead of the months, and we wouldn't get an exactly correct calculation. Alright, so that we've got one more to go, and this one's pretty basic too. So it's going to return another integer, and it's going to be called investment return. You can see that our code sense pop up. Declare its scope. Then we're going to type int and value, so we're declaring a new variable here. It's going to be equal to invest amount. That's the parameter that we're passing in, right? We're going to add that to invest amount times 6 divided by 100 times period divided by 12, right? Because we're saying we want to add the invest amount plus the interest we get on that invest amount, right? Because this statement here returns the interest that you'll actually get for that time, which we're passing here, and we're dividing it by 12 so we can use months, and the interest, the percentage here. So it will actually calculate the amount of interest we'll get with that amount, and that's 6% for the period that is passed in here. And what we're doing here is we're adding that amount. Say if the person put $1,000 in, right, and they left $1,000 in, they would get $100 interest. But we want to find out by that next year they'll have $1,100, because we want to find out their entered amount plus their interest, and that's what we're doing here. We're saying end value equals interest amount, which is the amount they're passing in, plus the interest they are going to gain for that amount and for that period. That's what we're doing there. And again, all we do is return that value, so return end value, semicolon, and we finish that statement. So we're returning that number, the amount that the user is going to end up with that interest added. So that's what we're doing here. So let's go over it again. This converts the amount to an integer that's a string, right? And then it's going to check how much that value is, and it's going to change the interest rate depending on how much that loan they want to pass in. Now for this one though, we're doing the same thing, but we're finding out the months they have to pay, because it wouldn't make sense to give someone 6 years to pay off like $100 or something. So that's what we're doing here. We're checking the value, and then we're giving a time limit on the time they have to pay it back by. Here just returns the interest from the interest amount, which is an integer. Remember, we have to convert that string that we're going to get from the user to an integer on the controller. We're not doing it through this class here. And again, another integer here, and we're going to return the interest here. Over here, we're actually getting the invest amount plus we're adding that interest the user's going to get, and it's going to return that value. So I hope you understand all that. We're going to, next tutorial, we're actually going to put our controller part of it and link it all together. So I'll see you then.